The Gaza Strip. You hear the name all the time in the news, right? And it's almost always tied to conflict. But what is this place, really? In this explainer, we're going to get past the headlines and try to understand the geography, the history, and the people of this tiny but incredibly important piece of land. Let's start with just one number, almost 6,000. That's how many people are packed into every single square kilometer of the Gaza Strip. To put that in perspective for you, that's a population density right up there with the city of London. This sheer concentration of people, well, it shapes absolutely everything, from daily life to the political reality. So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the basics, the geography. Then we'll trace the key moments in history that made Gaza what it is today. We'll dive into the super complex legal debate over its status, look at the reality of life under the blockade, and finally, we'll get to know the people who live there.
All right, let's get into it. First things first, where and what exactly is the Gaza Strip?
Okay, so picture this, a really narrow sliver of land, just 41 kilometers long. It's right there on the Mediterranean coast, kind of wedged between Israel to its north and east, and Egypt down in the southwest. It's one of the two Palestinian territories, the other being the West Bank. Let's run through some quick facts. The main city is Gaza City. The whole area is only 365 square kilometers. That is tiny, and yet it's home to over 2 million people, almost all of whom are Sunni Muslims. And here's an interesting detail. They use two currencies, the Israeli shekel and the Egyptian pound. That right there tells you a lot about the complicated economic web the region is caught in.
You know, to really get what's happening in Gaza today, you absolutely have to look back. The current situation didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's the direct result of some huge game-changing events over the last century.
This timeline really shows you how control has shifted again and again. After the 1948 war, Egypt was running the show. Then, in 1967, a huge shift. Israel captured and occupied the territory. Fast forward to the 90s, and the Oslo Accords created the Palestinian Authority to give some self-governance. But the two biggest moments recently? 2005, when Israel pulled all of its troops and settlers out. And then, just 2 years later, in 2007, Hamas took complete control from its rival, the Fatah party. That last event changed everything. And that brings us to one of the most tangled, most debated questions about Gaza. Is it still technically occupied? Now, this isn't just about words. It has massive implications under international law.
So let's break down the two main arguments. On one side, you have the United Nations and a lot of international groups. They say, yes, Israel is still an occupying power. Why? Because it controls Gaza's airspace, its access to the sea, most of its land borders, and even the official list of who lives there. But on the other side, Israel says no, the occupation ended when we left in 2005. Since there are no Israeli soldiers or civilians inside Gaza, they argue they don't have the effective control needed to be called an occupier. And both sides have serious legal arguments to back them up.
This is where you hear the term indirect occupation. It's a way to sort of explain the gray area. It's saying, okay, there aren't Israeli soldiers on the streets, but there's still this huge amount of external control. So really, the whole debate boils down to how you define the word control. Now, this legal debate isn't just academic. It has very real-world consequences. Because after Hamas took over in 2007, both Israel and Egypt put a strict blockade on Gaza. And that brings us to what daily life is actually like for the people there. So what is the blockade? Well, think of it as a set of really tight restrictions on what and who can get in or out of Gaza. We're talking about everything from building supplies and food to people who need to leave for medical treatment or to go to university. And for a long time, almost nothing could be exported out. This situation has led human rights groups and even some UN officials to use a really powerful phrase, open-air prison. It's meant to capture that feeling of confinement for over 2 million people who, for the most part, simply cannot leave. And the economic fallout from this, it has been absolutely devastating. The overall unemployment rate is about 46%. But look at the number for young people, a staggering 70%. That is one of the highest rates on the entire planet. It's created an economy that pretty much depends on international aid to survive. Okay, so now let's focus more on the people who actually call Gaza home. Because the demographics here, they're really unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. Just look at this. Nearly half the population, 43.5%, is 14 years old or younger. The average age is just 18. Think about that. this is a territory of children and teenagers. We're talking about an entire generation that has grown up completely under the blockade we just discussed. It puts this unbelievable pressure on schools, on healthcare, and on a job market that just isn't there for them. But here's a fact that might really surprise you. Even with all the poverty and economic hardship, the literacy rate is 97%. This points to a population that's incredibly resilient and educated. But it also creates this really painful paradox. You have a generation with so much potential, but with almost zero opportunity.
So let's just quickly recap what we've covered. Gaza is a small, incredibly crowded territory. It's been shaped by a century of conflict. Its legal status is a huge point of debate. Daily life is dominated by a severe blockade, and its population is one of the youngest and most literate in the world. When you put all these pieces together, the geography, the history, the politics, the people, you get an unbelievably complex picture. And it really leaves us with the one question that hangs over everything. Given everything we've talked about, what does the future possibly hold for Gaza?